Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. Welcome to Techstrong Gang. We are still experimenting here live. We're doing it at noon Eastern time. We'd love to hear, you like it better at this time? I don't know. I mean, if you're on the West Coast, I'd imagine you probably may like it a little better. You're up and about doing work. You could have this on versus at 7 o'clock in the morning. But for others, maybe it's the middle of your day and it's hard, and you're watching this on demand as a result. But in either way, we'd love to hear what you have to say about it. You know, as I've been saying, it is the most interesting of times to be covering the tech world. And every day brings new, interesting and fun things to talk about. I was doing the Security Boulevard podcast this morning, and after we stopped recording and we were just chatting, I reminded the guests that it's one thing for us to sit up here on Techstrong Gang or Security Boulevard podcast and talk about these items as pundits and, give our thoughts. But we can't lose sight of the fact that this is affecting people's lives. The kinds of things we're talking about are potentially changing humanity's role and how we interact with machines and each other and technology. And so, it's great to be glib and talk, but this is some weighty stuff we're talking about. Let me introduce you to our gang to talk about these weighty things. We have Chris Blask, Kate Scarcella, the man in the high castle, Mike Vizard, and yours truly. Mike, we're going to open up with OpenClaw meets OpenAI.
Yeah, just when you thought that it was going to settle down, it's like there's a whole other twist to the drama. Peter Steinberger, who is the guy who created OpenClaw, is now going to work for OpenAI. OpenAI says that they will donate OpenClaw to some sort of open source foundation yet to be named. And at the same time, if you go look over in Security Boulevard, there's a whole cottage industry of folks out there building software that purports to be able to help secure some of these instances of OpenClaw, which last report has already been downloaded more than 1 million times, and people are starting to play with this thing and use it everywhere. So, Chris, is this the natural order of things? Can this thing be secured? Or is, this just a matter of time before some form of chaos ensues when somebody hacks into these things and starts stealing people's credentials, which apparently, last time I heard, are just generally wide open?
Why not all three? Right. So yes, this is the natural order of things. This is how it's going to work out. I'm frankly loving this stage of it with Maltbook and all this. Hey, look, we built machines that speak. And Alan, to your point, we've been building stuff in my entire career. We've been building stuff that impacts people's lives. Like I've always loved the fact that I get to work in OT and IT, right? Because, talk to a linesman, talk to somebody building water systems and so forth. These systems, these technologies we've been building since we built technology, for all of human history, affect people's lives. We've been able to feel that we're separating them in IT because, you're not really seeing it directly, but it does. So to your points, Mike, it's, we have built these systems that are conversational. They process words, not just numbers. And, we're a little spooked out by the way they behave. And in recent months, they're starting to get social, and we don't like the way that works either. Right. But that is the natural order of things. That is where it's going to go. Now, I have my opinions about the mechanisms used to do these things to date. They're either going to be centralized and controlled by I don't know who, and we'll never know, or they'll be unbounded and chaotic. I don't think either of those are the natural order. Right. I think the flaws we're seeing in these stages we're going through indicate where we're going to. And, Kate, as you said in the green room, I've got my opinions as canonical base, sovereign, build it from the bottom up instead of the top down. But I think it's both fascinating. You can see where we're going. And if you think there are problems with this, you're probably right. And those probably can't persist.
Yep. So, Mike, I put out an article this morning. It's over on Digital CXO because it's really aimed at how digital leadership should respond to these things. It's called OpenClaw, Cows, and Free Milk. Okay. My grandma used to say to me, you don't buy the cow when the milk is free. She wasn't talking about AI agents. But, but my grandma was a smart woman. I miss her a lot. But the thing about it is this. It's over 2 million downloads, I believe now.
Okay.
It's actually by GitHub stars, it's the fastest growing project ever. Right? And so OpenAI did a move which is not unique. It's a move that we've spoken about on this show now a number of times. Don't buy the cow when the milk is free. They acqui-hire the founder, the brain, if you will. And in this case, they didn't even have to buy the IP because it was already open. But what they did, and some may say there's a sinister notion to this, is rather than donating it to like the AI Foundation, which is part of the Linux Foundation, which lets you play on a bigger stage with a lot of different characters so no one company can control it. And we're going to talk later on about CNCF's 10th anniversary. No, they didn't. They're setting up a separate sort of OpenClaw Foundation, which they are going to support, meaning financially support. Now, does that financial support buy them undue influence over this and make it sort of a cottage thing for OpenAI? Or is it really going to be a foundation open to the entire industry? And does anyone else find the irony in OpenAI taking over what used to be called Claudebot?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And Anthropic Claude, because that's what it was, and then making it their own. And now they've got this. Now, just because they did this, sometimes you could kill the goose that lays the eggs by being too heavy-handed. Sometimes you can't catch lightning in a bottle twice. The Peter Sternberger, I believe his name, he may not be able to replicate or duplicate what he did with Claudebot over for OpenAI. He's in OpenAI is a big company with a lot of politics involved. It's a little different than just running on your own with some open source project. But nevertheless, this project really may, when we look back, with a little hindsight, Monday morning quarterbacking, this may be the project that made Agentic AI real. Because it kind of sucked last year. I think we all agree a lot of these agents were not very good.
Here's
I
my
think
question
go ahead, Mike.
about that, though, before you get too far. I mean, it's a nice piece of software, and I'm sure it's well done, but I don't see, if it's open source, what prevents anybody from replicating it. So Google, Microsoft, and everybody else will have their own flavor of it, and they'll put their own guardrails around it.
There's no need to, because it is pretty agnostic.
Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah. Well,
Kate,
So-
you want to do? Or Chris?
Oh, the only thing that I think from a cybersecurity point of view is that we never architected for autonomous decision making. And I think this will show a big governance gap in exploiting it. And, at the end of the day, it's going to come back as, I think as, AI is evil, it's doing all these things. And in fact, it's only showing our flawed software and what we created.
But Kate, one man's gap is another woman's opportunity.
I'm not complaining. It's the reality. It's what it is.
I mean, the
Chris?
recursiveness in this is just wonderful, right? So yesterday on a Linux Foundation working group call, somebody mentioned that Ray Kurzweil had recently said that there's like $8 trillion in open source that's unaccounted for in GDP, right? And we know this one. Anybody that knows open source, it's like, the work done by people and teams and so forth, the compensation for that, not baked into the fact that we are monetizing at the corporate level a lot of this work. And that's been, to your point, Kate, that's been a flaw we've all been familiar with for a long time. And this particular case is a classic example of it. You said it right, Alan. Is there undue influence in this particular nonprofit, and so on and so forth? And the answer, we have to derive, given current situations, is you can't tell. right? And I've been
Really?
parts of these on all sides of them all my career. And even when you're doing your best, if I represent company ABC, I have an interest. How is that factored in? And is it 10 or 12 people in a room coming up with protocols, or is it the entire world? And this is a talk I've given multiple times in the last 2 weeks, because I think where open source, how that gets dealt with is similar to how we come up with protocols, right? They will emerge organically, from use in the world, instead of being concentrated in working groups at named, whether it's the Linux Foundation or this new foundation. Like, they're still wonderful, but we've been developing all these things centralized, and that doesn't scale. So
yeah, and centralized doesn't scale, and that's like one of the most important things. It actually will create a whole other slew of vulnerabilities if we go in that direction.
But here's an interesting thing, and I said it before. One man's gap is another woman's opportunity. Nature abhors a vacuum. What we're seeing, and I'm inundated with it, are companies, literally coming out of the sand, just to keep with that lobster crab thing, clause, that are, here to secure your claw bots, put the guardrails in, help you manage the risk. And Mike, as you mentioned on Security Boulevard, there's an entire cottage industry of companies, and I don't know if I call them proto companies, maybe, of solutions to handle some of the perceived shortcomings in Claude-Bot. There's religious schools to teach you the church of crustacean or whatever, crustacean. It's opportunity, and the ecosystem is gathering round, and that's where you look at something like a foundation there and say, wow, with an ecosystem, 2 million downloads in a couple of weeks.
All right.
That's something.
Kate, let me ask you something though. Do you think that somewhere there was a bunch of cyber criminals sitting around a table, and they would get up every morning and they have their cup of coffee and look at each other and go, can you believe what they're doing now?
Absolutely. No doubt. I think what we're seeing is this, and we know this, the exploitation of some really, because I've talked about this, we just have some really bad written code, poorly written code. And yes, I think it's like, there's probably like this grandstands of bad actors being like, yes, go.
Well, what
they got to strike while the iron's hot, though, as well, right? The salt typhoon keeps coming up, right?
Yeah.
If everybody's not familiar with that, that's basically just a way to say that the Chinese government knows the gap in everything in Western infrastructure, down to the device level, right? If your device is configured a certain way, but the absolute known best practice is a different way, they know the difference. You don't if you're running these systems, right? And that's an opportunity for now. And but the opportunity to fix that is also much greater now. So, Kate, you're exactly right. This is showing our problems in systems, and at the same time giving us opportunities that we didn't have the ability to address these things 5, 10, 20 years ago. Yeah. Now we can.
And I actually don't understand why it is that we can't use the same systems to help create, to stop those vulnerabilities at scale.
Well, no, I think that is the point. Think of if you put, clawbots on your system, on your platform, think of them as T cells that are being held in reserve to swarm out on any vulnerabilities and remediate, patch, do things.
Yeah.
Take it back to the biology of it, if you will, to a biological kind of system. And that's what you're looking at potentially here.
Yeah. And frankly, I think this is where AI really does, the potential for it can really go exponentially as well. Just really helping us clean up things that we've needed to clean up. And I don't know why we haven't. We seem to add, I think it's just us generally as people, from a hoarding situation, let's try to clean up. And as we clean up, you always go back to those. I swear I don't watch this show, but as you go back, it's like, it's back to hoarding. I mean, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just human nature and,
Well, there is that, but look, here's the fact. Why is this thing so damn popular? Why do we keep talking about it? Why are we fascinated with it?
I personally love it. So,
Yeah,
but go ahead,
because it makes every one of us smart enough to use agentic AI to do everyday tasks that we got to do anyway. And so, and isn't that the real promise behind AI?
Yeah.
Or one of the real promises behind AI, to make our lives easier and better.
Yeah.
It's
The other
really
It takes your job away, but that's another story.
The other way to look at that, though, is to say we're giving everybody superpowers but no controls.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
Yeah. Well,
All right.
we find out next block is
Well,
what we find out.
Stay tuned and we'll tell you. But we need to jump to our next segment, and we're going to bring in our friend Sid Nag. Sid joins us today. Good morning, Sid. How are you? Or maybe good afternoon already. Depends where you are.
Yeah, how are you guys?
Good.
Sorry,
Sid, you're right in time here for our second segment, the drone debacle down in El Paso. Mike, I thought it might be UFOs, but no, it wasn't.
No.
What exactly went on here?
Well, if you think about this story, it's been playing out for the better part of 2 years when it first started out with all those drones that were flying around New Jersey that turned out to belong to the government. And now apparently they were down at the southern border testing drones because they think they want to use them to combat drug cartels. But I guess they had a disagreement with the FAA about the fact that they were going to test these things. So the FAA said, we're going to close the airports at El Paso while you go do that. And then apparently it all went to hell in a handbasket from there. But it also gets curious and curiouser. Apparently, New York City has asked the government if it could take over some of those drones because, well, they might be flying around in places where they shouldn't be, and there could be some confusion. No word on response from the federal government about that. But Kate, it sounds to me like, we're kind of like going forward with drones with no policies and no plans. And, well, is this OpenClaw for drones?
What could possibly go wrong? Right? I mean, oh my goodness, like what the heck are we all thinking? I mean, it just made me think when I was, young and I, making money in the summers between school breaks. I think I had more training learning how to paint exterior of houses more so than these people are getting. I mean, they can't even identify a balloon between a drone and a balloon. Like, oh my goodness, we're in trouble. Danger Will Robinson, right? So yes, I really believe that that right now, it just shows so many problems in this space. And it's like so much that we see. I mean, you give people a tool, and it's like, especially a tool like this, and it's, it's like the wild, wild west. Everybody wants it. But the problem is that this is critical. This isn't about learning on the job. And it's really, really concerning. We've already seen, and I'm not trying to get, political here, but when we talk about custom border protection, already having so many issues that we have seen out in the field, now give them these tools, and then having this lack of information, it really is becoming a really, true nightmare. And are we comfortable giving lasered arm tech to law enforcement with no controls? This is, sort of going from bad to worse, right?
I'm pretty sure that bad guys are going to have lasers and start shooting them down too, won't they? Because if they're on the other side of the border, who's to say that they can't shoot it down? Because it's certainly Mexican airspace, so it's a different rules. I don't know.
Yeah. We definitely don't have policies around this. We definitely don't have any sort of governance around this. And, for such a long time, I mean, drones are And, Chris, we've talked about IoT before, right? I mean, if this is not, IoT on steroids and us not having any sort of visibility into this IoT device, it's a problem. And I don't know what kind of wake-up call that we need for us to be able to understand that we have a serious issue here. And I love technology.
Well,
Go ahead, Chris.
like we ended the last segment, right? We're at this point where we have these problems, and maybe we have the opportunities, using similar tools to fix them. And in my world, there's a couple simple words, coherence, right? Coherence gets very practical and applied these days because we have the tools to and yes, AI and vector stores and so forth. However, a story like this, and anybody who's worked in these spaces knows, like in security and cybersecurity, like, look, you have the FAA and CBP, and you have these different organizations. They have data information they work with that is canonical to them, classic definition, like they can actually act on that information, but they're different sets. And they're not necessarily coherent internally. And in this case, obviously, they're not coherent between each other, even though they're part of the greater, a single greater organization. And historically, people do the best they can. You print out spreadsheets, and you have working groups and coordination calls between agencies. But we also just happen to have the tools these days to actually get coherence in policy and sensor readings and so forth. So a case like this, we should be able to fix this.
Yeah. I mean, we already have flight aware. I mean, why can't we do something like a flight aware with drone aware, or something with letters, just like we have on planes, we have numbers and letters to identify. I mean, it shouldn't be that hard. And then when we have something in our airspace that is not identified, then it becomes a different story. But we need to...
timing, getting coherence among multiple systems is a lot about timing. Right. And just, anybody, even if you haven't been involved with these, just imagine it. You work for the FAA, you work for CBP. There's a lot of policies, a lot of human interaction to get, share information across domains and jurisdictions and whatnot. And this is a perfect case. By the time you have done that, you get lasers shooting at Mylar balloons in the real world. Right. And that's the kind of forcing function that'll cause the spending and the effort necessary to make that not happen.
Yeah. To me, it's like, I'm not an IoT or cybersecurity expert, but like, to me, it's a governance issue, which is what Kate, you referred to at the beginning of this conversation, right? I mean, it seems to me like certain federal agencies have jurisdiction over this domain, like Chris mentioned, there's FAA, DOD, CBP, etc. But, what prevents NYPD, for example, to have the authority over the airspace of New York to run these drones? I know they're pushing for it. I don't know whether they're actually going to get the permission or not. But you have this conflict between federal agencies and local agencies. You have issues associated with legality, safety, constitutional issues, civil liberties. A lot of other things, I think, that need to be thought about as this domain sort of gets some level of what I would say governance, right? So I think the governance structure is missing in many ways, and there's a potential for a lot of abuse, in my opinion. Right? So
things are going to get more interesting too. Apparently, Department of Homeland Security has a contract out asking SpaceX to create a voice-controlled swarm of drones, so that basically you can sit there and tell the drones as in an organized fashion fly, I don't know, maybe hundreds of these things in formation to accomplish some goal using a voice command. I mean, what could go wrong with that? How easy is it going to be to hack into a voice command system? I don't know. Chris?
But I think transparency is important too. I think Chris mentioned earlier the drones in New Jersey, right? I mean, I actually saw those drones from a deck, right? So whatever happened to it, we didn't get any final report on what those drones were doing, who launched them, and what ended up happening, right? So these are kind of mysteries in many ways. So, I think this is kind of wild west in many ways, right? So,
well, it comes back to time again, time to transparency, to your point, Sid, there's so much information we could get, but you're not going to get because you could file and it's too much effort. And everywhere we look, I mean, this segment is about an instance where well-resourced organizations could not get the time to transparency low enough between each other to not shoot lasers at Mylar balloons, right? And that's just an indicator of the fragility of this. I've had the great honor and pleasure of getting to know Tom Rich, who created DHS, right? And I asked him, one night, said, "You're a small government conservative, and you created that, right?" And again, it's just another indicator, right? That just getting internal organizations to communicate across policy domains inside the U.S. federal government, you end up with this, I'll be kind, massive bloated bureaucracy, that is as inefficient as it looks, right? That basically should be automated because policy domains inside the federal government shouldn't be opaque, at least to each other.
So, and here's one more piece of irony. So the British military is in Ukraine trying to learn best practices for managing and flying drones. So maybe everybody should just go see what
Well, ironic. It's the state of it, right? Because here's the thing. What is the Ukraine-Russian conflict war showing us? That the future belongs to unmanned drones. Stop putting money into piloted flights, piloted planes.
Yeah.
Right?
Good point. Now,
ever since drones first became available to consumers, there have been no-fly areas where supposedly they block signal and everything else, and your drone is subject to being shut down as well. So that's not new. What's new is what we're seeing in Ukraine, which is it's not some guy sitting with a little operator thing, though there are some of those in Ukraine. But we're talking about autonomous drones. And when you have autonomous drones that are going to make decisions to evade attack, let's say, or to be stealthy, or to carry out a mission which may be nefarious, well, that raises that takes it from the little kid flying a kite, right, to a terrorist flying something into a building, right? And so that's the risk here, guys. That's the game we're playing in. Yeah, we could talk about shooting Mylar balloons with lasers. Yeah, idiots are going to be idiots. Stupid is stupid. But what are we going to do when organized groups have autonomous drones? Iran sells kamikaze drones. North Korea, I don't think North Korea does. I think Iran sells kamikaze drones. They'll sell to anyone who gives them money. And what happens when we have someone who wants to do something stupid in this country or in Europe or in the West, let's call it, first world, and they use an autonomous drone to go do it? We have got to have the ability to take these things down. We have to develop that if we don't have it right. Governance and regulation is always a trailing indicator. It's never out in front of the problem.
Yeah.
So you don't think one good man with a gun is going to make all the difference here?
Well, look how well it's done with stopping shootouts in schools and everything.
Yeah. Right. We need a counter drone agentic AI.
Well, you can look at it on YouTube. Slaughterbots, one word. It's 5, 6, 7 years ago. There's this great, produced forward-looking bit of wake-up call on autonomous drones. And at the time, I said, well, yes, obviously, those capabilities will come along. But to your point, Alan, the defensive capabilities have to match them. Apocalyptic scenarios keep not working out because there's always multiple sides, right? And I know we're coming to the end of the segment, but I think there are answers to this. And it's not, sometimes you need to be able to take things down, like literal defenses are what they are, but this is the same as everything else. If we can have agentic killer drones that can run rogue and make really good Hollywood movies, then we can't trust them in AI and financial systems either. And I think the same sorts of answers apply everywhere. It doesn't get rid of conflict, but these nightmare scenarios, of gray goo, don't happen.
But I think this kind of goes back to responsible, in some ways, the discussion on responsible AI, right? Countries can either trade arms at a government level and agreements to do arms trading, or you have, people smuggling guns and arms and nuclear weapons, under the radar, right? So what do you want to do? If you have the proper governance structure, then yeah, it'll happen the right way. But if you leave it sort of, wanton and let people just do their own thing, and to some degree, governments are buying into that sort of policy about not trying to govern this whole drone business. And I don't know why, right? I think that's really the crux of the problem, because unless you have that agreement and that standards around how you're going to exchange these, how you're going to deploy these drones, how you're going to control these drones, how you're going to, somebody talked about licensing drones, all of that, you're going to have rogue actors do crazy things with these things, right?
But I think, to go back to Alan's point that he said even at the beginning of all of this, beginning before Block A, is that we're really talking about serious, critical issues that are, and we are just able to talk about it. But there's really serious things happening right now that take some real thought, because we're talking about lives. This is going to cost some major lives in both of these blocks, that people, until they see it happen, it's and we can't say, oh, we didn't see it coming. I mean, that's the truth, because we are seeing it coming. We need to act on it more so than anything. So,
well,
absolutely.
And to end on that, I suppose, are costing lives and always have, right? In my comment earlier about, OT and IT, in the OT space and operational technology, these systems will cost lives even when they're working properly, because it's a complex world. In IT, we like to believe that's not the case. It has always been the case. If you wipe out a bunch of people's bank accounts, that will shorten lives and maybe end them, right? So the consequences have always been there. We're being forced to address them, and I remain firmly optimistic that in the long arc we solve all these things. It's about reducing harm in the near term.
yes, Chris.
Fair enough. Guys, we're over time. We got to jump to our third. It's hopefully a little lighter, a little happier. It's a happy birthday. Happy 10th anniversary to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CNCF. Mike, what do we have?
Well, there was a small little event in New York to commemorate that, and Jonathan Bryce was there along with some of the other leadership folks from the CNCF, and it was nice because, they celebrated the last 10 years, but that was short. Conversation was more about, the next 10 years, and from their vantage point, they feel pretty good about where they sit for largely two reasons. One is it looks like Kubernetes is evolving into a de facto standard for inference engines for AI. We'll see how that plays out. And then they're also making some assumptions that, the AI agents that we're going to build are going to be calling more back-end services than ever. And most of that will be through APIs calling through to back-end cloud native computing foundation projects. And this is going to result in more consumption and more usage and more dependency on open source software than ever. Sid, what do you think about all that?
Well, I think a couple of thoughts. One is the high order level thought is AI inference will drive increased cloud native software consumption, right? So that's pretty clear. So, I'm looking at this announcement or this development as AI inference being the primary driver of cloud native adoption. So especially for inference engines deployed on Kubernetes, now it's positioned as a major new workload, right? Which will accelerate cloud native consumption in many ways. But to your earlier point about the back end access being more pronounced in this model is also important, because I think we're going to move away from the GUI access to more of a headless services from that perspective. So where AI agents will increasingly invoke sort of cloud native backend services without the traditional sort of interfaces that people have been used to. And I think the third issue is the whole issue around platform engineering, right? So I think you're going to see this evolving software engineering roles around where platform engineering becomes even more central to how teams build and deploy applications that are cloud native in nature. So I think there's three sort of talking points here, but it's clear that AI agents and agentic AI is going to drive increased consumption of Kubernetes-based cloud native services. So it's a good thing for CNCF, I think, overall, because they can now sort of claim that they've entered the AI world in a big way, right? That has impact on not just the applications, the AI workloads, impact on headless access, and third is the whole platform engineering functionality. So,
fair enough. here's the thing. First of all, happy birthday, CNCF. What a great job. I think back 10 years ago to when I first, maybe it was a little more than 10 years ago, when I first became exposed to the word Kubernetes. I was down in Austin, Texas at DockerCon. And we were thinking about doing a container website, a new site. And I went down there and I was trying to figure out a good domain name with the word Docker in it. And I realized using Docker was going to get me sued. But I went down to Austin, and in the middle of DockerCon, there was a little truck of, like literally a stand, where they were talking about this thing, Kubernetes. It was 0.08 or 0.8 of the Kubernetes release, or maybe it was 0.6. And I came back and I told the team, I said, the heck with Docker. There's this other thing, Kuba something, that everyone is talking about. But not to worry, I don't think it's going to catch on. It's really hard. This is why I still got to work for a living. But
it only took 10 years, though. So
yeah, but here's the real thing. The CNCF chief, and I forget his first name, Mike. Jonathan. He's not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
AI inference will drive increased cloud native software consumption because more code lifts all boats, right? It's that simple. However, the real battle is the cloud native stack as we know it now, which is Kubernetes and its friends. 200 odd projects in CNCF. Is the CNCF lineup with Kubernetes at its core the real stack for AI computing? Because AI computing is going to be the dominant computing stack, right? Where today for Greenfield, cloud native computing is, right? Kubernetes based. Is there going to be an AI equivalent? Will Kubernetes take on these AI orchestration chores? And that whoever wins that battle will be the winner in the next 10 years.
I think we're kind of looking at this a little bit too much like human developers. And I might argue the following. The AI agents in the future aren't really going to care about whether the open source software came from a consortium or not. They're basically going to sit there and say, hey, this LLM got trained on some open source software, and wherever they found it, and they're not going to care where it came from. And therefore, what is the compelling reason to necessarily commit to being part of a foundation when I just need to stand up open source software, expose it to an LLM, and AI agents will find it, and that will be my route to market and my distribution. And all these foundations, not just the CNCF, I just kind of look at them all going, are they going to be artifacts of yesteryear? Kate, what do you think?
I absolutely agree. And I saw Chris shaking his head as well. I think that, I actually think we're going to have more of a distributed environment, especially when we're talking about headless. I'm not confident on the cloud model. And I know that probably sounds, crazy. But, when you look at what Chris's work is doing around having more on-prem, this is where I think it's going to be going. I mean, we might have to have a short connection to download something. But at the end, I think it's going to be more of a Tor type of network, Onion type of network. I think it's going to have to be in order to be able to handle the speed. I think it's going to be a more of a distributed model instead of cloud-based. And so I totally agree with you, Mike.
So I disagree.
All right.
Because you need that tension in these shows. But I really do disagree. Let's take it back to the first segment here. OpenAI starting this foundation for OpenClaw. And I had my doubts about it because who is going to rule that? Let's remember a time where open source software was not in the foundational model. It was in what I call the big brother model, where one vendor basically ran the open source project like their own player piano. right, for their own benefit. And no, Microsoft wouldn't contribute to a project that Google's involved in. Google wouldn't contribute to a project that IBM's involved in. IBM certainly wouldn't contribute to a project that Oracle or Sun was involved in. And we all suffered. And then along came the Linux Foundation and the CNCF, a daughter foundation, one of 40 foundations I think the Linux Foundation runs. And it took that big brother element out of it. Now, no one company controls the path of software development. And yes, we could one-off everything with AI and say, the hell with it, I'm going to build it myself and my agent go do it for me. But you look at something like OpenClaw, 2 million stars in a couple weeks. You look at some of the big open source successes. Why are they successful? Because they give people the building blocks. It's like the 4 or 5 bases, whatever, that we build DNA around, right? These are the DNA of tomorrow's AI applications and functionality. And we don't want any one company controlling them, whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic, or whether they have a constitution or the laws of robotics. And so these sort of foundational player foundations are a way to keep it honest.
I
Yeah,
don't
and I can play my
OpenAI. I don't think an AI agent means we got to go back to Big Brother whatsoever. I think that's an old construct that's also gone by the wayside. I'm saying there's a whole new construct that has nothing to do with Big Brothers or Little Brothers, has everything to do with OpenAI and the AI agents, and whoever builds them can access
But
anything.
everyone wants to orchestrate them.
I agree with Alan, because I think we should less focus on the word cloud in CNCF. It's more about creating that
compute stack.
Well, it's more than compute. If you think about AI inference, it's about orchestration, it's about observability, it's about networking, it's about security, it's about policy control. You want all those discrete elements run in silos, in sort of proprietary or layers or substrates. I think that could cause a lot of chaos.
So I'm gonna try to agree with everybody except Mike, but this is still
no one agrees with Mike.
But but you're wrong too, Alan. So I'm just trying to be funny about it. But this, so observability was the word that I've been jumping out of my skin over here about, because I try not to be religious about the on-prem stuff, but just like in the firewall world, remember this, Alan, back in the 90s. When I got to Cisco in 98, the idea was we're going to get rid of the firewall appliance because it's going to disappear. And I'm like, no, it's a psychological thing, right? People want to be able to go put a coffee mug on the thing that's the edge of their network. And we sold billions and thousands and whatever of those bloody things. And I think it's the same sort of way with AI, right? And we're finding that people like their little pod, be physically right here, have all my stuff and my AI running on it. However, right, the observability of tying into massive open source and cloud stacks, and Mike, where I particularly wanted to pick on you was not, getting open source and not caring. No. That part, getting open source and caring and saying, I'm an agent out here. I'm running on my on-prem stuff. I'm invoking stuff up in the cloud. I'm calling open source. And I specifically care exactly how much about which open source as you told me to back home. Right. And if you're not telling me exactly what you're doing, I'm not listening to you. And I won't process. I won't use your code. I won't use your cloud stuff. So I think it's all observability all the way down. And what that means is observability appropriate relative to who you are. And if the whatever layer above you doesn't meet that, you just won't see them. You won't interact with them at all. So if you choose to be, just do anything and I don't care what it is, maybe that works for you. But I think most people will have observability of that their choices and what they're connecting to were actually sane.
I think headless is one step away from using APIs to invoke services that are disposable, and the AI agent's probably going to look at 3 different observability platforms and pick the one that does the job best, and the next time pick a different one, because that's the orchestration that'll be built in.
Yeah. I agree with you, Mike. I do.
I hate to do so, but I think I do too. So,
and those APIs have to be open. I mean, it can't be just proprietary APIs. So you can't just talk about headless in a vacuum. Where
the agents themselves have to be open.
Exactly. If everybody starts, to your point earlier, every vendor starts creating their own headless access points or access mechanisms, it'll be chaotic. So,
Well,
Absolutely. But
Keith
I'll
had
tell
this-
you what's chaotic. This discussion. We got to end it, guys. We're out of time. What a great discussion, though. Sid, Chris, Kate, always. Thank you so much, Mike. Great stuff. Even if Chris does disagree with you, you're still the man in the high castle. They can't stop you. We will be back tomorrow with yet more Techstrong Gang. We've got Techstrong TV replay following this immediately. So stay tuned. There's so much going on right now. You got to do everything you can to stay on top of it. You know, it's a great way to stay on top of it. Subscribe to the Techstrong newsletters. A lot of what we talk about here comes right out of our articles, and they're in the newsletters. Go check that out. I think you can subscribe on LinkedIn now or on any of our sites. So do check that out. Thank you all for watching. This is Alan Shimel. We're out.